Welcome to the Shared Practices podcast. I've got with me my co-host today, Murray Lowe. Murray, how's it going?
Going great. Great to be able to talk about leadership, culture, and change. Always my favorite topics.
It still feels weird for me to call you Murray. Like my father-in-law, Paul, he corrects me when I call him Paul. He's like, no, call me Dad. So this instinctual, I should be calling you Dad keeps coming up. So I'll have to process through that, but we'll get past it.
Yeah, that's your problem, not mine.
That's my problem. In this interview, this is with Reese Harper from Dentist Advisors. And I heard recently, and we'll get into it in the interview, that he had read a book that I still haven't read, but you were instantly familiar with it. So why don't you introduce this book that we're going to talk about here today?
Sounds great. So the book is called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and it's by Patrick Lencioni, who really is one of the top leadership thinkers of the 21st century. He is an amazing storyteller and has insights and an ability to communicate about organizational and team insights in a way that people can really get and really understand. And the book resonates with people mainly because everyone goes, yep, we have that. Yep, I have that. It really feels like organizational life for, I would say, the majority of people who work in any kind of an organization, large or small.
So it's just so relatable because it's these dysfunctions that are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. Everyone can point to, okay, that sounds exactly like this person or this situation, and they've seen it before. So it just feels so real.
Yeah, and then Rich, you and I could maybe co-author a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Family, maybe later, right? As a sequel or something like that.
You're going to have to retroactively introduce a lot more trauma and abuse into our family upbringing. So sorry, you missed the boat on that one. So no, but the main reason I wanted you to introduce it was I just can't say the last name. So can you give us some more Italian there? How do you say his last name?
It's Lencioni. Actually, if you pronounced it in Italian, it would be Lencioni, but it's Lencioni. And the book has sold over 3 million copies. It's been published for the last 18 years, and it's really kind of fun because it tells it as a fable. Like it kind of uses an example in the corporate world of pretend like this is really happens, and in fact it does really happen in most organizations.
Well, cool. Well, we'll get into why we're talking about this and what Reese did with this book in his company, Dentist Advisors, in the interview. So here we go. Reese, welcome back to the show.
Richard, it has been too long.
It's been way too long.
I feel like I don't even know what has happened in your life in the last 6 months. Last thing I knew, you were taking over the world, and now you're still taking over the world plus a couple new jobs.
No, I have 3 jobs. I am a podcaster, Army recruiter, and get to practice a little bit of dentistry once in a while. And there's some
a combination of all of it.
There's some practices in there somewhere.
That's awesome. Well, congrats on all that you've had happen over the last 6 months, man. It takes a lot of hard work to eke the career forward and move it. And it's cool to see that you're still got your hands in a lot of different fun areas.
It's fun. If the chaos isn't at a high level, we're doing something wrong.
You won't know like what to do to yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I don't know if you remember when I came and recorded with you in person, my dad was in the room.
I do remember this.
So he's now my co-host for this season that we're recording.
Oh, no
today.
Way. That's awesome.
So it's on leadership, culture, and change.
Okay.
And he's been a consultant in, Fortune 500 companies for years and years and years, trained crucial conversations to like over 15,000 people in Canada.
That'll be really cool.
Tons of fun.
Yeah.
And I thought of you for a couple topics, and we'll have to do the other one another time about hiring, because I feel like you've built a very intentional culture in your office, and we're not going to talk about that today. I wanted to talk today about something you posted about recently. You read a book,
yes,
and that book seemed to have impacted you pretty significantly. It was the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Not 4. I got it wrong earlier today. I was like, I want to interview Reese about the 4 dysfunctions of the team. They're like, you haven't read the book, have you, Richard? I was like, no, I have not. But this book impacted you enough to the point where you were like, hey, what if we made this a thing in our company? Maybe we should talk about this as a team. And I don't know how much you've grown since, you've talked about some of these issues, or if you're now like, how many people are at Dentist Advisors?
I don't have an exact count, but it's close to, I would say it's close to the 30-ish range.
Okay.
Plus or minus. Right close to 30 probably.
So you're getting to the point where there's people that you don't directly interface with on a daily basis.
Yeah. And that's a big surprise, right? I never really thought of how when you're interfacing with people on a daily or at least every other day basis, you can kind of control your culture. Your culture becomes an extension of you. And then at some point you start to realize that if people who that we hired somebody that it had almost been like 8 weeks since they were working there and I hadn't yet had a one-on-one conversation. Like I did interview them for the job,
sure,
of course, and was part of the interview process. I was the last step of extending the offer, or at least the last step of deciding whether we should extend the offer. But I didn't talk to the person for 8 weeks after they were hired. And in any kind of like, how are things going kind of a way, which in some companies, that's actually not unusual.
It's very normal.
Yeah.
But to have built this yourself from scratch, when it's just you and Ryan and and now you're at that point, you're like, okay, we want to make sure that this culture doesn't go somewhere we don't want it to go.
Yeah.
Was there, and I don't, you can say I don't feel comfortable talking about that. Was there anything that you noticed that's like that the culture had shifted or that it was starting to?
Oh yeah. I never feel uncomfortable, as you know, about talking about anything. So that makes my team uncomfortable sometimes.
Oh, good. No, that's good.
But radical transparency is the next book we'll talk about.
Okay.
Okay. But first, the thing I started to notice was just, I noticed when I would have a chance to talk to a newer person, sometimes the conversation topics that they would talk about showed me they were more concerned about their job than maybe the success of the organization.
Like keeping their job
or protecting their job or
kind of like their turf almost.
Defending their value or inflating their role, or maybe I started noticing people talking about other people in a not an overly negative way, but in a way that wasn't super supportive, kind of like tearing people down.
Which happens everywhere, whether it's a team of 30 or a dental office of 6 or 8.
And I had never experienced that. I mean, even on a team of 15 or 12 to 15, our culture was so good. We never had experienced any backstabbing or any employees talking about other people. And I just, when you hire someone, they've only been there for 6 months and their previous job experiences have not led them down a great cultural path because they've had a bad boss or they've had bad team members, or maybe there's been intracultural fighting and bickering. Then they come into your organization, your original team isn't strong enough to like overcome that unless there's a systematic kind of indoctrination and like really abrupt addressing of certain issues. And so I started just doing like a leadership scramble and just feeling like, man, I'm going to lose control of this, and I've raised capital from investors in order to fund the growth of our company and the building of our technology. And we have, a really strong idea about what we're trying to accomplish, or at least I do. And I want my whole team to share that vision. And I never really realized how important leadership was and how important culture was, and team dynamics and things that seem like soft skills and qualitative mushy stuff like, vision and mission and values
and communicating those over and over and over.
Yeah. And anyway, there's just a lot of there's a lot of things that I was just incredibly naive to, and now I feel like I'm more informed about.
Sure.
That, luckily for me, we had such a deep culture to begin with. There was something there to build on.
Yeah.
I think acquiring a company or, acquiring a dental practice can even be harder sometimes because you're inheriting some culture that you have to like really, it might take longer. I still think it's possible to indoctrinate good culture in any organization, but it takes longer if there's not any roots there.
Well, and culture is both circumstantial, but also the people involved.
Yeah.
And so you're inheriting, you didn't get to hire those people one by one.
Totally.
And gradually introduce them to your values and
Yeah.
all of that. So we face that. I think our podcast in particular, we talk a lot about acquisitions. And that first year of like gaining their trust, and transitioning and starting to make change and starting to do things differently, there's a lot of moments where things come to a head.
Yeah.
And you don't have a long history of relationship capital to draw upon.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of early leadership moments.
Yep. Yeah. So I noticed a lot of this I noticed some things I was uncomfortable with.
Okay.
I started researching a lot. I came across a bunch of different books.
Okay.
But my lead CTO, David Weiss, who I trust a lot and is really a close friend of mine, he recommended to me this book by Patrick Lencioni called 5 Dysfunctions of Team that I hadn't read.
Okay.
And I get recommended books every couple of hours.
Yeah. You should read this one.
Yeah. And
this
so I'm
is
like,
the one.
I can only read a book a week,
Right.
So I got 50 books a year I can process or something and right. And so I turn down 10 books for every one. When David tells me to read a book, like me and him intellectually, probably one of the people that I like listening to hear him talk because he's smart and I like pay attention usually because he knows what he's doing. And he said, I think this is the best one that has, I've read. And so anyway, I hadn't read it. It's a business classic. A lot of you may have read it that are listening to this, but I hadn't. And
How old is it? Do you know?
I think it's 11 or 12 years old at least.
Okay.
I mean, so I wouldn't say it's a classic, but it's been around for a bit.
Sure.
Patrick Lencioni is famous for one of his major books is about influence. It's called Influence. It's about persuasion and helping people. And then this one, the 5 Dysfunctions of Team, he's kind of iterated on a few different versions and spun off. But this one's by far the most popular book that he's written. And I found that my team was violating most all of these dysfunctions to some degree, or at least some team members on the team. And I just immediately had tons of empathy for dental practice because I was just like, oh my, dental practices are this is a big problem. Like I have problems, but man, dental practices have really big challenges,
right?
Because some of these dysfunctions are highly toxic within dental practices, and we're still incorporating them into our culture today in a way that's still really uncomfortable and causes people to have to grow and develop, and that's been really important.
So, what was the moment that you read this, you recognize, hey, we need to work on this? How did you make the decision? Not only do we need to work on this isn't just going to be like me talking about, I read the book, but I want to introduce this to everyone.
Yeah.
And to make the decision, we're going to spend a day or two. How long? I mean, what was that decision making of how are we going to introduce the concepts of this book into our team?
Yeah.
Because I see, you said you can process 50 books a year potentially. Mm-hmm. Some people, it's been 50 years since they've read a book. There are non-book readers. There's people that are not excited about corporate training or all of that. Talk to me about that process of deciding to set aside time and get your team on board with reading this book in the first place.
Well, we have town hall meetings in our company where we do an offsite once a quarter. Okay. Where we set up, an activity or a morning. It's a full day event, but we review performance. We review our big milestones, and we're starting to formalize, what are called OKRs, which is another topic for another day, but a way to, an OKR is a fancy business word for an objective and then a key result. And each of your calendar quarters that you work, you want to be able to, both at a departmental level and globally, set objectives, maybe as many as 3, and then key results that measure the success of whether that objective has been met. So our offsites are hopefully intended to, review our OKRs and review our progress, talk about celebrations and milestones and new employees. And like around Christmas time, this last one we did, we have a gift exchange and we go bowling and have, an afternoon that's fun and a morning that's more intense. And so I wanted everyone to read this book, and most people need they've got to have a reason and a deadline or some kind of we're going to be all talking about this,
right,
and you're going to be on the spot and to have a chance to share your ideas. Turns out, that I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation. I think the books that you do read, in a half a day, you're only going to be able to accomplish so much. But I think the real value is that your team is aware of key issues that you're focused on and that you're discussing them and that you're bringing them up. So some people are going to listen to it with Audible. Some people are going to do it on, and I just offered, just submit for a reimbursement, buy the book, get the Kindle, get Audible, get all three.
Sure.
I don't care. Just submit for reimbursement. Whatever you need to do to get this done in, the next couple months, and then we'll talk about it at our offsite.
Okay.
And that's kind of how I decided to just tackle this one. And periodically I'll probably continue to do that. I don't know if I'll do it every quarter.
Sure.
But I think I could see it happening as often as once a quarter.
Cool. So you made it really easy for them. You already had these quarterly meetings and you decided as part of that quarterly meeting. So it's not like you shut down the business that, out of the blue. That was kind of already your maintenance plan for yourselves. You had this time set aside. Yeah.
And, in this quarter, we didn't get to dive in. Everyone's now aware of the 5 dysfunctions, and we have ongoing conversations about them. There's some like inter-office humor about in the book 5 dysfunctions. It's a fictional. The way the author Patrick Lencioni addresses the topics is by telling stories about an actual company using real people and real examples.
It's like a big allegory example.
Yeah, it's a big fictional business tale. And so it's easier to read than a traditional nonfiction book.
Okay.
And so that makes it a little bit easier. And people can relate to certain characters and they can relate to the ideas. And so there's a guy named Mikey in the story that, had a certain personality trait. And, no one's a bad person in the story. They just all have different traits. And sometimes in the office, someone will say, I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm being Mikey. Or I'm sorry if it sounds...
So that's incorporated itself into the language of your company.
Like, I don't mean to come across like Mikey, but I want you to know.
That's a great sign.
It's so cool.
That it's been, it's
it's been so transformative.
Okay.
I mean, it's been so transformative. Like, it's incredible what it's done for our communication, for our transparency, openness, and how we're progressing and working collectively. It's changed our compensation policies.
Wow.
It's changed our team structure. It's changed our resource allocation, how we're going to grow. We've established a really, really clear vision and mission statement that we didn't have prior to this. That was just, incredibly authentic, and it was a combined effort from all team. I mean, it's just been really transformative. So I'm surprised, at how important this stuff is. And I don't know if it's as important as a 3-person team or a 2-person team, because at the time I had more control over that culture, and I felt like I could, I also feel like it shouldn't be a one-time thing. I think that it's hard to develop this when you've only been in business for a year. But I think every year you can continue to refine it. Right now, we just happen to be at a point where we hadn't done it for so long that it was really time, and we were really due for this. And it made it to where, because we hadn't really had this deep entrenched vision and mission, and we weren't paying attention to these 5 dysfunctions, there was a ton of work for us. So
now we've teased it and heard a little bit that, like, okay, this has actually made a big impact on your company.
Yeah.
Let's go over the 5 dysfunctions and give us the high level overview of them real quick before we go into any in depth.
The first dysfunction is an absence of trust among your teammates. That absence of trust stems from people having a fear of conflict. with one another, or internally, having fear of having to address their own inadequacies, their own shortcomings as employees. So an absence of trust between your team members, which causes people to kind of have fear and hide things and not tell the truth and not say things the way they really are, and you have to model, in order to solve this, you really have to model vulnerability as a leader. You have to tell them what you're working on and tell them your weaknesses and your mistakes and what you feel like you're trying to improve. And team members need to model that. And it needs to be okay to be part of the organization and working on improving something. And people still need to feel safe in their jobs, and that to me is a really kind of the primary thing that I think has been, an improvement for me as a leader is I don't look at people now when they're vulnerable. I feel more trust for them. If they acknowledge their shortcomings, I want to help them improve. If they hide things and if they don't tell me the truth and if they aren't vulnerable and if they're always saying that they're right and blaming other people for things, then I don't have I can't build trust with that person as easily. And so by, breaking down, by becoming more vulnerable and by making it safe to be imperfect and people open up, you can start to build a culture where you're never going to fire someone for being imperfect. You're never going to fire someone for making a mistake. They know that if they lost their job, it's because of multiple conversations and an extended period of time where you gave them an opportunity to both hear directly what you were worried about and really try to overcome that. And then, multiple opportunities of not being able to improve, then they might find out they're not a good fit for the team. But you're not going to snap on them because of something they did and yell, and you're not going to be angry with them just because they made a mistake. You're going to be patient and work through and coach them. And you're going to tell them directly when you are in a positive and constructive way what you want them to improve immediately. And I've tried to take that approach in all my relationships, and I think it just builds trust when you're just direct. And when you feel something that you're worried about, just being transparent and telling people that, it's the best way to build team culture.
This sounds amazing. And this is something that as a leader, creating this safety and kind of getting rid of this fear is something you can immediately influence. Like, I think that something that's really powerful is this is something that is in your hands from the leadership down. I think one of the parts where this might be hard for some people is, say as a leader, you're trying to do this, you're trying to model this, but there is some of that inner office, like back talk about people. Mm-hmm. And so creating that safety and creating that standard of safety so that people aren't worried that if they share something as a team, that other people are going to make fun of them or, make a snide remark or all of that. So part of it is it like an immediate, as a leader, if you really embody this and make sure that you've set that standard and that you're an example of this yourself. But I can also see how it could be challenging to get everyone to adopt this same level of vulnerability and openness with each other.
Yeah, I think you just got to practice it. I think it's one way that you can practice is just in a team setting, as a leader, have an in-depth, discussion about something that you're working on, and share that with your team and let them know that, you hope that each of them are also looking at things that they can improve and get vulnerable and share something that you're trying to work on and tell them a story, I think another way that you can really create some vulnerability and some team trust, it's kind of, at least Lencioni says this is an example, is just sharing more personal stories about yourself in a historical context, where you grew up, the way you were raised, like your life experiences, the way your parents kind of taught you about a concept, like just sharing more about your past and your early life does a lot for people to help feel trust in you and get to know you in a work setting. So,
okay, cool.
Anyway, I thought that was a good one. That's kind of the first dysfunction and kind of how to approached it.
And you feel like this is one that you, and I guess we're going to go through these just a little bit more rather than doing an overview. Let's just go through them one by one and dive in. You've seen a lot of results here. Like in a short period of time, this has been a big switch for you guys.
Yeah. I mean, this one combined with the second one are pretty closely related, but the second one is the second dysfunction is fear of conflict. It's people being scared of talking directly to each other about anything, confronting each other, in a kind of courageous conversation kind of way. I think those two things both, the absence of trust is a huge dysfunction, and then the fear of conflict, when you're scared to tell someone else what you really think, you're really never your organization won't progress. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that dentists are going to have with their team members is your team members won't tell you what they really think because they're worried about their jobs, and they're worried that you're going to get upset, or very few dentists create a culture. They think that they have a culture of transparency and openness, but most employees do fear sharing exactly what they think. And it's important to, encourage healthy conflict, acknowledge that conflict is normal, acknowledge that conflict is part of the work environment. Don't do any kind of mean-spirited personal attacks. Conflict around ideas, conflict around concepts, conflict around challenging someone's business process or business procedure. Just say, I think, can I share something that I feel like might be helpful, in the situation? And the minute you feel like something is not right, like you need to be able to share that directly with a team member. So I had someone today text me, they were at an event, and because we have had this concept kind of circulating in our business, don't have any fear of conflict, make sure and address things. This is the one where you can help stop the backstabbing and the conversations. Like if you have a problem, go directly to the person and express it in a constructive way and let them know how you feel. They will respect you more for it. It will increase trust. And I got a text, from one of our team members, just said, I was at an event in the city, and a couple of the dentists said that they had received some communication from a person on our marketing team, and they felt like it was a little like they had been overly reminded about the event coming up. Like to show up to the event, like it was like they kind of
like, I got
bothered,
this.
but I got this. Like I don't need to be reminded
don't babysit
3
me.
times to show up to the event. That's what the dentist told the team member. The team member came to me and said, we should talk about strategy here because I feel like some of the people at the event felt like they were getting reminded about the event too much. And because we had this foundation already established of no fear of conflict, I just said, well, will you just go ahead and address that with the marketing team directly and the person that did it, and make sure you can kind of communicate your feedback to them.
Right.
And the text back to me was like, sure, great, I'll get right on it. Right. But the first reaction was go tell the boss about the problem.
Here's the problem. We should fix this.
Got to fix this.
Fix it, boss.
And I don't think that's what this person was saying.
No.
But that's the reaction, right? The leadership hierarchy is typically you skip all of the people in the organization and you go to the person that you think you should report to,
right,
and tell them the problem.
Right.
But really what we need in organizations is we need lateral communication among team members
as often as possible,
frequently, without the involvement of the principal owner, because that's where trust is built. That's where fear of conflict breaks down. And in this, I was really proud to see how my team reacted, because in this particular easy example, it would have been easy for this person at the event to throw the marketing team under the bus. They didn't do that. They just said, I have a concern. I observed this. It seems like we might need to slow down our reminder policy. But a couple of years ago, I think it would have been something more like this. Like, I'm really tired of so-and-so keeps bugging all the potential clients. Like, they got to stop it.
Right.
Because it's annoying, and I don't like them. They don't get it. They don't know how to market. They don't know how to.
Right.
But it was more like, I've observed this thing. I don't think it's a good practice. And then I reminded them, go tell the person directly. And they said, oh, sure. Great. I'm right on it.
Cool.
And they have a courageous conversation now, and they're probably going to work it out. And
maybe they do, or maybe they don't change that. And maybe the next dentist was like, man, I wish you guys had reminded me 4 times. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like the conflict that one person perceived, just share it with the person directly that you had the conflict with, and watch the progress happen. It's going to be good for both people. And so that was a really critical one for me.
That was like in the last 24 hours that
and I see that daily. Like, I'm talking like 5-7 times a day right now. That's happening.
That's awesome.
We're just saying, if someone's talking to me about somebody else, my first reaction is, have you talked to them yet about this? Because I think they would really appreciate hearing this.
Right.
I know no one wants to be the dead weight on a team that's not growing and progressing. Everyone wants to grow. Yeah. So do them the privilege, the gift, give them the gift of the knowledge that you have to help.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how organizations will we accomplish 3 times as much when we're communicating directly and we don't have a fear of conflict.
These are some clips from an amazing interview that we had with Dr. Ashley Hoviz and Dr. George Hariri. And we talked a lot about our experience with Swell CX.
What were you doing to get reviews, and what were your numbers before Swell?
I didn't want to ask in the beginning. I had my team do it.
How many do you get now?
The first 7 days
with Swell,
I got 24.
That's incredible.
24.
That's awesome.
See,
and I had not asked one single patient for a
You didn't ask one?
You took
No.
an ask vacation.
I took an ask vacation, and I wanted to see exactly what this program was going to do
Yeah.
for me, because it's one less thing I have to worry about
Thank
as
you.
the business owner.
yes, that is exactly my point. Sorry
Yes.
to point at you, but so my team, I was new in an acquisition, and I was like, I don't want to emphasize Google reviews because they're already focusing on other things. I don't want to add one more thing to their plate.
Right.
So I wanted a software that would just get us great results. And my joke is that we don't deserve, but great results that just happen automatically.
Yes.
And that's exactly what it is.
I want my whole practice to be like Swell.
Yeah.
it just does its job.
It could just,
love-
if it could
that's
just
so
be
quotable.
so
Good one.
automatic,
That's
just
good.
like Swell.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. I think, George, you're selling yourself short. I think you do deserve 21 reviews a month. Actually, I think you deserve 24 reviews a week. So Swell is doing some social justice here. George is fun. Ashley's better.
Yeah. So
So whether you have a high-end fancy practice like Ashley's or a dental office that smells like a dental office, go to swellcx.com/shared practices to get the absolute lowest price on Swell through our exclusive promo. Once again, that's swellcx.com/shared practices to start getting more reviews today.
It seems like this book is like a foundational culture piece that anyone in any business, but especially a dentist in a dental office, can take this and these things will always need addressed. They will always need reinforcement, and they will always increase the performance and the ease of doing business as a team.
Oh, yeah. No question.
Okay, so that's 1 and 2.
3, it's called lack of commitment. It's a lack of commitment that people in your organization have because they don't sense any clarity around their role, or they're trying. Like, one of the problems here is that the team wants a consensus. The team's always trying to get 100% of the people
Everyone on board.
Got to get everyone on board. And you don't actually have to get everyone on board in order to have everyone be committed.
Okay.
You just have to get everyone's input and then move forward on your plan, taking all the feedback into consideration and then declaring, the consensus that you feel, not the consensus, but the choice that you've chosen as a leader after receiving everyone's feedback and caring about it and listening about it, right? And involving everyone in the discussion. Like, our vision and mission statement was a very good reminder to me of how to go about getting commitment from people. Everyone had a say on what they thought the types of themes that should be in there, and the ideas that should be in there, and what it is that we uniquely do. What is it that makes us different? And it was several weeks of collecting feedback from every team member on their ideas, right?
And this has to be really deliberate because, we just had a meeting in my dental office where we were talking about what are the purposes in our community that we want to get involved in. Do we want to get involved with the schools? Do we want to get involved with different charities? And there's always some people who are much more vocal and passionate about certain things. And then other people who maybe have ideas but are less likely to share or, don't speak up. So how do you purposefully get feedback from everyone.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to extract feedback from people, especially people that aren't as vocal and aren't as likely to share. It's like in the vision and mission statement, I wrote personal emails to each employee asking for their contribution and what we were going to do and asking for their individual feedback. And then for people who didn't respond, I followed up.
Okay.
And I just said, I really want your opinion on this. It matters to me. Can you tell me what your ideas are? And then we met as a team at our offsite, at that quarterly meeting, and we discussed some sample draft vision and mission statements that could be the consensus. But I didn't present them as the answer.
Right.
I presented them as draft copy that we could talk about.
So you've baked in 2 layers of this. You've deliberately gotten feedback from everyone. You've then brought not a final decision, a working copy of, hey, based on everyone's feedback, here's what I'm seeing. What do you guys think? Do you feel like this represents us? So another round of potential feedback.
And then at that point, we went through another, good 45 minutes of debate where not everyone ended up agreeing, right? But 75 to 80% of the people agreed on, like, literally in our case, every word of the vision statement, right? Every word of the mission statement. And word choice is really critical. Like, I want people to have buy-in to this idea of what we're building. And so it was cool to kind of get to that point and have everyone go, everyone's behind it now because everyone had their say. They had their shot. They saw the consensus was not, even the people who disagreed with a particular angle got to see that their voice was heard, but there were more people on the team that felt differently than they did. And they said, okay. I can commit to that. Yeah. I get it. I'm now on board.
I'm most of the way there, and I can set aside this one word difference here.
Yeah. Now, that's a simple example, but I do think it translates to every decision that you make in your business. You don't need to involve people in every decision.
Right.
But some of the big decisions, like big goals, big goals that really are going to drive results, or cultural issues, or big policies, those kind of things need to get broad consensus, or you're not going to get buy-in. You're not going to get collective buy-in, and people will lack commitment to your organization. So if people don't get a say, they'll lack commitment. And you have to let that process happen. And you don't have to get 100% consensus to move forward. You just have to let people participate.
That's awesome. So decision making, I think it just, that process, I love that it's not consensus, but that it gets everyone on board.
Yeah.
And it's a straightforward way to do it.
Most people think they need 100% consensus. You don't. You're not going to get that. But you let everyone participate and always share their voice. And you'll start to notice people will open up more. And if they know that their voice matters, they'll share a lot more. It's when you have top-down leadership just declaring the goals.
Here's what we're doing.
You're never going to get buy-in.
Right.
So I think that's really critical.
Okay, so number 4 now.
4 is avoidance of accountability. People generally don't like accountability to anything. They would rather be just hardworking and not have anything that they're actually responsible for.
It's really uncomfortable. I feel like just as much as conflict. So number 2, holding people accountable. It's hard to hold people accountable, and it's hard to be held accountable.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable.
If you don't have any accountability for people, what'll end up happening is that people will shift their focus usually to something that's highly personal, like highly like highly individual. You want people to collectively be building the organization together. You don't want them to isolate themselves. That's why I have a big problem with Dennis getting paid on a percentage-based compensation model. I just think that your practice is not going to be healthy if you're compensating one person at 30% of production and then you're saying, but let's work as a team here. I would rather the person get paid a salary that adjusts annually or quarterly with bonuses based on a percentage of production being a component to their compensation, but like there's a lot of factors that should go into their compensation, and that would be a better way to compensate. The more you like, the more you narrowly define people's compensation and their results and their accountability, you're not going to have anyone looking outward. You're going to have them always focused on their own personal achievement.
Which is where these incentives and compensations tend to get away from you.
Yeah.
Is where you've set up this structure and there's all these second order consequences of the bonus system that you implemented for these team members to do X, Y, and Z. And now they do X, Y, and Z at the neglect and destruction of all these other things that need to get done, or it just gets out of hand.
Yeah. And I don't think all of what I've found, at least, we've been through this, we've gone from a percentage-based compensation model for our advisors that was similar to how most dentists do it, to where we've completely shifted to salaries plus bonuses that are not quantifiable by a particular financial metric, but it's a set of qualitative measures. And we have we'll call it a compensation committee. It's between me and my COO, and then a couple of other people that I consult with that are on my advisory board. That is the way that compensation is set, and it's reviewed with each employee quarterly, and most people don't expect to get bonuses. We're not setting the expectation that there's bonuses every quarter. We're setting the expectation that we're setting goals every quarter, and some of those goals are going to be production oriented. Some of those goals are going to be team oriented, training oriented. Some of those might have to do with quality metrics. Some of those might have to do with particular projects that we want them to tackle this quarter. I mean, think about it. If you're a practice owner and you had 3 associates, and you told them the way I compensate my associates here is partially on production. It's partially on the way that they interact and help and train my team. It's partially on special projects that I assign to them to do during hours where they have downtime. And it's partially due to the way that we succeed as a group, right? And that is how I, do compensation here. There's a disconnect partially because people want control and they want to avoid accountability.
Yeah.
When you just, if it's a little less quantifiable, then some people just don't like that because they want control over how they get paid.
Sure.
But I think for the most part, it doesn't build good organizations when people are paid on such a narrow framework.
So you've one of the ways you've addressed this dysfunction is by restructuring your compensation. Yeah. What are other ways to implement accountability without
changing compensation? So you can sit down on a quarterly basis and say, hey, in order for us to have the healthiest practice, I really need your help in helping me accomplish some things that are really critical. And I'd like to be able to go over these things with you every 3 months and sit down and talk about, the goals we set, the things we were trying to do, and then how we did, and you just meet in January and you meet in April and you meet in July and October, and you don't change compensation, but you just set goals that don't have to do with their 30% of production or the hygiene department's production. That's part of it, but you're just having conversations.
Okay.
You don't change compensation, but you change the conversation and create some accountability that's not exclusively driven by their production levels or a revenue metric. I think that's the healthiest way to start, no matter if you change compensation or not.
So setting aside time. So you've got goals, objectives, and you're circling back, you're following up. It's a one-on-one thing. And they know that if you sat down and talked about it 1 month, it's not just going to disappear and you're going to forget about it. You are going to follow up. And that takes a while to establish that expectation.
Yeah. And when you're really small, you'll probably be able to do this yourself you can do it on your day off on a phone call and Zoom calls. You don't have to always be face-to-face physically, but you should have someone in your organization who you're training on this process that does this for you with the team members, and you could have more than one person depending on their specialization. So the lead hygienist could do this with all the hygienists. The front desk manager could do it with all the front office, and you could do it with the doctors. And I think that no matter what's happening, every employee needs a chance to have some accountability to doing what they said they were going to do having a chance to review it, it'll give them more, just more self-respect in their job, more personal achievement, satisfaction,
So what I'm realizing though is if you've done 1 and 2 well, where you've removed the fear and there's trust there and you're not afraid of conflict, this accountability is not going to be laced with the same fear and frustration that it would have been if you didn't have those other dysfunctions addressed.
Yeah. You can't really get to this level, and you got to start in the order that these are presented in. The order that he presents them in the book are really, for a reason.
Okay.
You got to build on each other. You won't get to this point until you've handled 1 and 2.
Well, and if you try and jump to this point and just lay down the hammer, that's when the culture shifts a whole nother way.
Yeah.
It just got toxic real quick.
Totally.
So, okay. So number 5, what's the last one?
Well, I think that the fifth one is he calls it inattention to results. So, it's after you've created some accountability, unless you have results, like actual results that you can quantify, people will tend to feel like they're accomplishing their goals if you haven't created a key result. So this is where this whole OKRs methodology comes in, objectives and key results. That's you'll see is handled in a lot of different books. Objectives and key results were a thing that Hewlett Packard started in like the 90s and 80s, and they're kind of a standard business talk. But when we talk about accountability and you sit down and you're setting these things with people, you're not just setting an objective, which would be like increase hygiene production this year. That's an objective. Well, what's the key result that we measure to know if that actually is happening?
Right.
And then you set that key result and you hold people accountable to that result. So accountability is one factor, but then like actually people will tend to not, they'll tend to feel like they're successful unless you have a key result.
Everyone feels like they're doing a good job if there's nothing to like prove one way or another.
Nothing concretely. You want people to, if they're not paying attention to a result, they start paying attention to other things that you don't want them to pay attention to.
Right.
Like status in the organization,
Mm-hmm.
like where they sit,
Mm-hmm.
like who they are, like if there's not a results driven culture, then there is a ego driven culture, or, team status. Like my team loves me, or my team thinks I'm great, or I'm individually, everyone likes me here, or, anyway, there's a lot of negative outcroppings that come when people are measured on things that are not really concrete.
So, and this is where, we love practice by numbers. There's other software platforms that'll do similar things and give each department a lot of data. And this is also where if sometimes people feel like, oh, well, if we're going to be tracking this number, we got to tie a bonus to it or these other things. But just the mere tracking of it and reporting on it and going back to it is going to direct their attention and their focus and their work, because people just want to see the number move. They want to see that what they do makes a difference.
I've been surprised. I don't think people actually are driven as much by bonuses tied to these results as much as they are just that they feel good to be accomplishing things in their job. And so I think bonuses, it's probably not good to tie bonuses to every key result. And it's important to have a lot of key results that aren't really tied to revenue.
Right.
There needs to be key results that are not revenue driven, that are not production driven, that are not like patient number driven. These are like things like, you helped us improve the employee handbook, or you helped us document a process that now other hygienists can follow, or you took time to train everyone this quarter on this topic. Like you need to set key results that are not always driven by revenue in order to build a good team culture. So that's a good starting point, man. I mean, for us, it's been pretty pivotal to go through this, and I'm still working on it. And even as we're having this conversation, I'm just thinking of all the things I got to still work on and improve.
Well, and I just love this because this season, the biggest fear is a bunch of nebulous leadership principles and culture talk without any actions. But I love that you've taken this and implemented it with your team in your company and seen results from it. And it doesn't seem like this is impossible to do or that it required some, crazy outside intervention. It's like, no, you're setting the example, you're focusing on these things, and you're revisiting this and going over and over. So I think this is something that any dentist could read this book, could make sure that their team has whatever way they want to read it, whether it's even if it's like a Blinkist summary version of it or a Cliff Notes version of it, if whatever that team member is capable of doing, coming to that with having familiarized themselves with the 5 dysfunctions of a team and working through these, whether it's once a month or once a quarter or making a half day out of it, I can't see how this wouldn't improve the culture of a dental office.
Yeah, I think it's good insight. I think the last chapter in the book's a pretty fast executive summary of all these. So somebody just has to get buried and want to skip to the end.
Yeah,
there you can catch it there.
Cheat code at the end there.
Yeah, it's great. I really found it really valuable, and we're onto our next issue right now, which is these objectives and key results, how to set the proper objectives and measure and track. These 5 dysfunctions, I think, are more foundational, though. If you haven't even been exposed to these principles, it's important to start there before, especially fear of conflict and absence of trust and getting your culture right.
Yeah.
You just don't want a culture where people are not telling you the truth and they're not telling you what they think, and they're just behind your back. They're just thinking something different than what, they're just not telling you to your face what they really believe, and it's going to create problems over time.
Well, I think, and this is the last thing I'll say here is there's a certain tension when you're afraid for your job, when you're not working in a team that you're in harmony with. There's this tension and frustration that kind of laces all your interactions with team members, with patients, and the experience, the qualitative experience of showing up for work in your practice. What does that feel like for your team? If you've done these and laid this foundation, even if you take out all metrics and results, you and your people will be happier if you've done this.
Yeah, totally.
And that's really hard to measure, but at the same time, it is palpable.
Yeah. I'm much happier right now. It really is something that can help you enjoy your career a lot more. Like, it's a reward in and of itself to get your team to a place where they're achieving the best version of themselves.
Absolutely. So. Well, thank you for coming on and sharing some vulnerable examples there and your journey with this. And hopefully, I don't think you overshared, but we just won't let Jenny or anyone else listen to this.
Oh, they're all doing great, man. My team knows how much each of them matter to me, and it's a safe place to work, and everyone's got plenty of room to grow, including me. So it's easy to share things.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Reese.
Thank you. Talk to you soon, Richard.
Talk to you soon.
Okay, there was a very detailed breakdown of the 5 dysfunctions of a team, and one phenomenal example, at least I thought, of implementing this within Dentist Advisors, the company, from Reese. So I thought this was really cool. Like, I love storytelling and actionable content and concrete examples of this. So I was so excited to interview Reese, and he did not disappoint. So I don't know. This is what you do every day, so maybe this is boring to you.
No, not at all. I often tell people that, every family is screwed up in its own little particular way. And I think every team or every dental office or every organization is screwed up in its own particular way. And in fact, admitting that you're dysfunctional kind of frees you up to saying, we're all broken and we all need to get better. So one of the fundamental premises of the field I'm in around leadership and change and culture is that we need to improve and we need to change, and the change doesn't start. It's not you guys need to change. I wish I had a dollar bill for every time I've heard an executive say, if the people down below just wanted it more and they just cared more about this, we'd succeed. The implication is, I'm doing everything I can, and I'm the perfect leader, and the people below me just aren't motivated the same way I am. And that's not the way you get people to work as a team. So the very fact that if you can, everyone in a practice or a team says, I'm screwed up and I'm dysfunctional. Okay, we all are. We're all screwed up as individuals. We're all screwed up as a team. Rich, you and I are screwed up too. We can talk about that later. The fact that he would take this on and that Reese would say, hey, we're messed up. Great way to start. And using a model or system is always even better than just to say we're screwed up and everyone looking around, well, what does that mean, right? So,
well, and I thought it was interesting. He noticed this as his company is scaling. He talked about at the beginning that he's at 30 people now, give or take, and there's a lot of people he doesn't interact with directly one-on-one, and overall some things were sneaking in of gossip or people talking about each other or wasting time, not wasting, but spending time defending their job or defending themselves rather than actually getting the work done. He also has been very deliberate about building his culture from the start and hiring very carefully. And that's a whole nother episode I want to do with Reese, is his hiring process. But I don't think a lot of dentists, A, have built a culture this deliberately, or B, are that good at hiring that they don't have issues with this. So I don't think a dentist needs to get to a team of 30 to realize that maybe there is some absence of trust, some fear of conflict, that some things that they could be working on in their team. And so I guess my thought was like, don't think that this doesn't apply to you because you don't have an office of 30 people yet. Is that fair enough to say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the first thing he talked about, and the first skill, but the first thing he talked about, the first skill is about an absence of trust. Trust comes because people need to feel safe in their jobs. And we have a society where people automatically don't feel safe in their jobs. In fact, it's by law. I think 2/3 of the states in America, they're employment at will. So you can hire and fire at will. And so, and we talk about career limiting moves and career exiting moves, and don't ever admit a mistake or you'll get fired. We see mistakes as failures or mistakes as things that are going to cause us to lose our jobs. And so being able to create an environment where people feel safe in their job is a fundamental, it's foundational to creating improvement and creating a team mentality that is vital to an office of any size. I don't care whether there's 3 of you or 20 of you. If people aren't safe in their jobs, you're not going to work as a team.
I think that this is so hard to do well because of all those things you just talked about. And so it's almost like you can't overdo this, like creating an environment of trust, an environment where people don't fear conflict. Foundationally, you could circle back to this every year, every 6 months, every 3 months, and you probably wouldn't be doing yourself much harm by re-emphasizing any of this.
Absolutely, because it only takes one exception. People have been conditioned for years and years that if something's going to go wrong, they're going to get fired. And so you might spend a year or two creating this in people's minds, and then something happens where someone leaves the practice and it gets misunderstood or miscommunicated, and all of a sudden everybody's afraid of their jobs again, right? So,
losing their job.
This is an ongoing process where you have to see, vulnerability as strength. You have to see making mistakes as learning opportunities. And you have to recognize that no one's perfect. Everybody's trying to do the best they can do. And, you're not going to let someone go if they make one mistake. You're going to give people more and more opportunities to prove themselves before you would ever do anything. And everyone needs to know that you're being fair and trying to develop and trying to create that culture. So talk is cheap. You can tell people that they're safe in their jobs, but they will feel safe based on what actually happens, not what you say.
Right. And it might take 6 months to 9 months to a year of them hearing you reemphasize this and demonstrate when someone actually does royally screw up, and how you handle that moment, more than what you've said for 15 minutes during a little training. So how would you, if you were to take 5 dysfunctions of a team as a model and to say, I want to work on this as an office, what would be some advice that you would have for a dentist to go about doing this?
Well, as a dentist, the absence of trust comes from when people don't reveal problems or issues or challenges they face. So you have to model vulnerability. Tell them your weaknesses. Tell them what you're working on, your mistakes, the things that you're trying to improve, and some of the struggles you're having with that. So you've got to come across as saying, I'm a human being, and here's all the things that I'm messing up with, and that's okay. So that's the first thing. And then when anytime someone comes and criticizes you, you want to thank them for bringing that information to you. Or anytime someone comes and tells you a mistake they made, you thank you for bringing that up. I really appreciate that. So it's really welcoming problems.
Which is so hard on both sides to tell people. It's so easy to get reactive if someone gives you feedback or someone has screwed up. Like, the default reaction there is such a knee jerk in the complete opposite direction.
Yeah, you roll your eyes, and all it takes is a roll eyes and a little a sigh, and that's it. You've lost it, right? So this has to be deeply ingrained in you to recognize we've got to have problems and issues out in the open here, and so that just comes. That takes, depending on what's happened, before you bought into this practice or what you've been doing. I mean, so the nice thing is, if you haven't been doing this, you can go back to your team or your office and say, you know what, I just learned something that I'm not doing a good job in, and I'd like to reset this, right? And from here on, here's what we're going to do. And then you have to model that for the next 6 to 9 months or a year so that people believe that. But there is such a thing as a reset for any of this stuff you're doing around your leadership and culture. And so it's if you haven't been doing something, you recognize you want to do it, take ownership for it and move forward and start to communicate that, and then just model and do it.
Nice. Well, I would love if anyone has feedback, or if you've read this book, share on our Facebook page, or if you have questions, or whatever your experiences are around this. I would love it if people came and shared that. And in fact, we've had a listener, based on a previous episode that you and I did on the 360 review, who is now developing a 360 review to use with his team. So he said he was actually willing to come on the show. It'd be fun to maybe have a interview with him and you and I, as he's very open with some of his leadership failures that he's had in the past. But so I love the application of this, and I would love it if anyone shares that on the Facebook page, or wants to come on and talk about it.
And I'm always happy to help. I coach every day. I talk to leaders and executives and coaches who are trying to do their best, and yet no one's perfect. Everyone's got things they need to work on, and it's really interesting. Usually, the people who try and cover up their mistakes or are try and be invulnerable and try and show what a good leader they are, at the end of the day, it ends up getting in their way down the road. And so someone who wants to come on and talk about that, be happy to touch base with that person, and let's try and figure out 1 or 2 things that maybe they can try a little bit differently as they work with people, as they work in their business. I'm happy to talk people stuff. I'm happy to talk business stuff, strategy stuff. What I'm not good at is the technical, tactical, dental. I don't know anything about the practice of dentistry, but the practice of business and the practice of leadership, I've been doing that for 30 years.
Well, there we have it, folks. That's an open invitation. Hopefully we don't regret that in 3 months or 6 months or a year.
Yeah, we might.
This is localized to February of 2020. check back in, listen to episodes in 6 months. Maybe we've shut this off. But for now, there's a narrow window where some free public coaching is available.
Well, so normally, occasionally I'll get stumped, but most of the times I get stumped, it's from you. And that's back to the 5 dysfunctions of family. So that's
There
probably
you
a
go.
different thing entirely. But, 9 times out of 10, we can help people out.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Murray. And we will talk with you next week on the Shared Practices podcast.
I look forward to it.
I'm excited to announce a partnership with Sandy Pardue. We are rebooting the Dental Drill Bits podcast. Sandy and I sat down and said, what if we did a podcast together? What if we did a whole season of your show together? And it works out perfectly because I have a ton of questions and she has a ton of answers. So we combined my skill at asking questions, but not necessarily knowing the answer, and her skill at answering every single question with a wealth of knowledge, specific examples, and experience. If you want to get your dental practice organized, if you have trouble with understanding the roles and the functions and the systems of your office, join us every Tuesday on the Dental Drill Bits podcast.